Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start the session now. And I want to welcome you to Truth and Trust, scaling up support for independent, trustworthy journalism to fight disinformation. My name is Mark Thompson, and I'm the co-chair of the International Fund for Public Interest Media. The other chair is the great Filipino journalist and Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa. And this new fund, IFPIM, has a very simple idea. It's to gather money from governments, private companies, and foundations who believe in promoting the cause of independent, high-quality, trustworthy journalism, and then in an arm's-length independent way, gifting that money in grants to journalists and editors around the world, with a particular focus on the developing world. So why did we become chairs of this institution? Both Maria and I are experienced journalists. We're both people who started as reporters and became editors, and then in very different ways. Maria, you may know, is a brilliant leader of a tough investigative website, Rappler, in the Philippines, and is fighting a heroic personal battle for journalism there. I'm a former head of the BBC and chief executive of the New York Times. What we have in common is a belief that great journalism can support democracy and change lives for the better. And we're also united in believing that journalism is under real threat at the moment. Two kinds of threat. A political and social threat, the enemies of free speech and the promoters of disinformation are more confident and have better technology today than ever before, and they're active in almost every society in the world. We face a growing threat from, if you like, the rejection at a political level and a social level of even the legitimacy of independent journalism. But everywhere, and particular in the developing world, there's also an acute economic problem with journalism. It's very, very hard to find commercial models in many countries which can sustain great journalism. So it's as if journalism is in a vice, with politics and economics conspiring to make it difficult. Now, exactly 1 year ago in Paris, at this Peace Forum, the Paris Peace Forum, we announced the idea of IFPIM. And over the last year, we've made, I think, astonishing progress. We've been hiring people. We have now funding in the tens of millions. We have support from 7 countries, 5 or 6 independent foundations, and some of the world's biggest digital companies are supporting us as well. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that, I hope, later in this session. But what I want to say is, the theme of this year's forum is la multicrise. In English, we have ruder words for that particular phenomenon. But the idea that we now have, at the same time, a major war in Europe with profound ramifications. We have an energy crisis. We have a broad economic downturn. And we have visibly, in country after country, acute problems with democracy and acute doubts about democracy. We have, as it were, around the world, good days and bad days, but people almost everywhere worry about democratic institutions. So what we want to do today with our fantastic panel is to explore this issue. And I guess my basic question is going to be, given what else is happening in the world, should we still worry this amount about independent journalism? Haven't we got bigger things to worry about? But I think, as you'll discover, independent journalism and access by the world's population to information and news they can trust turns out to be very, very important in all the other crises as well. One of the things IFPIM has begun to do is to award our very first grants. We have money, and we're actually, there's going to be between 1 and 2 dozen teams around the world who are going to get the very first grants from the new international fund. And one of the successful applicants is on my right. It's Paula Miraglia, who's the co-founder of Nexo Jornal in Brazil. So why don't we begin with you, Paula, and first of all, just tell us, what is Nexo? Why did you found it?
So, good afternoon, and thank you for IFPIM and the forum for inviting me. I'm not a journalist. I am an anthropologist with a PhD in anthropology, and I've been working my previous life entirely with research and public policy. But at some point, I was worried about the impact of my work, and I was working outside of Brazil, and I decided to go back to Brazil. And the way to promote impact on the agendas I believed, the way I found was to create a media outlet, which was Nexo. So Nexo is a digital startup launched 7 years ago in Brazil. We are a subscription-based organization with no advertisement. We have been growing a lot. We built a reputation in Brazil. We won several industry awards. And what I can tell you to answer that question, and how is it related to democracy and the place that journalism and media in general occupies nowadays. Brazil is not alone in the scenario we described. Brazil has a very traditional and concentrated media ecosystem. Our media ecosystem is controlled by 5 big families who has 5 big outlets. It's really hard for us to have competition, and if you want to have a diverse public debate, you need to have a diverse media ecosystem. Yeah. But it's really hard to be a new entrant in such a concentrated market, in such a traditional market. All these brands, they are 100 years old. And we know that news consumption is very associated with the habit. So how do you become a habit when you're a new news organization? And how do you become a habit when your distribution depends on the big tech platforms? So these are our challenges. How do you become a habit, and how do you become a news organization that is profitable, sustainable, independent, when you have a market and an economic situation that is really challenging? So for us, I mean, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of vision, there's a lot of idealism as well. We believe that information is a public good, and we believe that people have the right to access trustable information.
And so, Paula, just describe for us, right now in Brazil, what are the pressures, the political and commercial and broadly economic pressures playing on Nexo and other purveyors of independent journalism?
That's, I believe is the key question when we think about new initiatives when it comes to media organizations. I think we have a political challenge that is clear. Brazil just came out of an election that took out of power a president that has, since his first day of mandate, has been attacking journalism and journalists, particularly women journalists, and has promoted an environment that enable everyone to attack journalism and journalists. We have a huge economic crisis here in Brazil that prevent people from subscribing. Is the first thing they cut when they're cutting costs. Netflix, media subscriptions, is this kind of things. We have a market challenge, as I was describing to you, that is like this very concentrated market. And in this particular point, and I think I want to make a statement, it's very hard to be an ethical, completely ethical, sustainable media outlet. We leave a lot of money on the table because we don't do things the way the market is used to do. We need to talk about this because sustainability has to do also with business models. If we don't discuss business models and, for instance, advertisement, and I would just give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. Taboo and Outbrain, from my opinion, they're killing the trust in journalism. How can you promote misinformation on your website actively? Because you want to pay the bills in the end of the month? You're going to ruin your editorial trust in the long run.
So, and we should just say that Taboola and Outbrain, for anyone who doesn't know, are algorithmic companies who, if you let them have space on your news site, will use their machines to work out what's the most effective ads or content, commercial content, to show in those windows, and they'll give the publisher a share of the revenue from that. But the trouble is the editors have no control at all of what appears in those boxes, and it can be fake news. So you can be having real news surrounded by fake news. So there are interesting questions about that. Now, the new international fund is interested in helping as many countries in the global south as it can. Latin America is a really important focus for us. But so too are both many parts of Asia and Africa. And I want to turn now to Ghana's Minister of Information, Minister Opong Nkrumah, and really ask you, Minister, let's start with disinformation, which we know from the recent election is such a big issue, has been such a big issue in Brazil. Is disinformation also a perceived danger in Ghana as well? And if so, what are you doing to try and deal with it?
So it's exciting to be on this panel with all of you who are trying to solve the same challenges in similar ways around the world. I'll tell you a real story of what happened in Ghana quite recently. You may have heard that our currency has taken a beating in the last 2-3 weeks. One of the things that contributed to an exacerbation of the depreciation of the currency in the last 2-3 weeks was essentially a bout of cooked up stories that were then put on social media and pushed to go viral. And what it did was that it caused a lot of panic among domestic investors who were then disinvesting their CDs and then chasing dollars in an inordinate manner on our local markets, ramping the currency, up in terms of the dollar and then the CD down. And just, I think, last week, we succeeded in arresting a couple of people who deliberately set up websites, published fake stories, and then put them on other social platforms in an attempt to make it go viral. That's just an example of how much harm disinformation is doing, not just to security, but to economics, to safety, and to the other facets of our lives. So disinformation, and sometimes even on a lower level, misinformation, is really causing some harm to democracies around the world and portends a lot of risk out there for us. The challenge is that you have to strike a balance in dealing with it. You don't want to come out high-handed and start shutting down, media outlets that legitimately make mistakes, or even social media platforms in general, because they are necessary tools for the advancement of democracy. You want ideas to flourish, and therefore you don't want to clamp down on them. So you have to strike a balance in dealing with them. One of the things that we're trying to do is to support a lot of fact-checking platforms, so that whenever some of these things come up, you can quickly get a voice out there that can set the record straight and curb the negative impact of some of these bouts of disinformation and misinformation. Another thing, particularly to deal with misinformation and false narratives, is to help journalists and media outlets step up their capacity and their ability to do a good job on a regular basis. And so at my ministry, the Ministry of Information, through a national funding mechanism, we're supporting the Media Capacity Enhancement Program. We are also supporting, through that same fund, efforts at preserving the safety of journalists. But there are local initiatives that are also aimed at helping respond to some of these mechanisms. And a third facet of what we're trying to do is to support these local initiatives. And I think that what we need is a concerted effort of all stakeholders, government actors, civil society groups, the private sector, to come into these, may I say, solution pots and help deal with the challenges we're facing.
And do you feel, on balance, that a multilateral international effort like the International Fund, is that a useful addition, or do you feel that in the end this is better done at, with the funding coming at national level?
No, I think it's a very useful complement, because while some of the challenges are local, and therefore you require local interventions that are culturally sensitive to deal with it, the same challenge is going on in many other parts of the world. So you could do with some global technical advice. And of course, it's easier to raise more money on the global platforms, and so global resources to complement the local effort to help deal with the situation.
Very good. Now, I want to turn now to another minister, Tobias Lindner, who's Minister of State at the German Federal Foreign Office, who's fresh off a plane from budget discussions in Germany. And Tobias, if I may, what I want to ask you is Germany is a country now which, as we come towards the end of 2022, is wrestling with a major war in Eastern Europe, with an energy crisis which poses both enormous human problems, but also knock-on effects for industry, great expense in terms of the package that the coalition government announced to help German citizens. Is this topic of disinformation, in particular global disinformation, is that something that the German government is still focused on, or do you now have much bigger and more urgent problems to consider?
So good afternoon, and it's great to be here, and I can assure you this topic has a high priority for our government for two reasons. First of all, we should not be so naive and believe that, let's say, Western European democracies are somehow better or better immune against disinformation. On the one hand, we have in Germany a broad support of our people for the solidarity with Ukraine when it comes to humanitarian aid, when it comes to hosting refugees, also when it comes to military aid. At the same time, when we are looking at numbers, and I was just told a few days ago that the number of people in Germany who believe that Ukraine is not a legitimate country has increased, meaning that we are not immune, and therefore it affects us, and therefore we need international exchange.
I just want to just underline that the German media have been reporting, I think, a study from one of the universities, which shows that over the course of the war, that the percentage of Germans who believe that the Putin's invasion of Ukraine was justified, and a whole set of other arguably disinformational, statements about the war, that the number, particularly in the eastern parts of Germany, of citizens who believe that is growing quite steadily.
It's growing, but among a group, to clarify that, among a group who didn't show solidarity also at the beginning, but it shows that we are not immune against disinformation. Therefore, we are looking to exchange with our international partners, first of all, about what's happening, and then about the toolboxes. What can we do? And you just mentioned that I'm coming from a plane. We had Parliament is in session. We had budget negotiations last night for 18 hours in the budget committee. Now the budget for next year is finalized. And I'm very happy to announce that the parliamentarians decided to increase our spending on fighting disinformation by 8 million euros next year, and also to increase our funding to protect and to support journalists who are in danger by 9 million euros. I think that's an important step, because that would be my last comment. We are looking for partners. We rely on partners that are democracies. So therefore, it's in our own interest to help and to support those partners in fighting disinformation, and to have an open, heterogeneous, private journalism and a free media space.
And is it your view that as you think about disinformation, that it can be solved largely by finding ways of identifying and flagging and possibly disrupting the distribution of the bad actors. Is this idea, which is at the core of IFPIM, that it also makes sense to make a kind of try and put some of the pieces in place you'd need to make sure there's a good alternative. Now we know in countries like Germany and most many countries in the world, there is still access to good journalism, and the debate is how do you make sure that citizens, are more likely to find that than disinformation. In much of the world, there's a risk that the good actors will be snuffed out altogether, isn't there? I mean,
I totally agree that there is a risk, but we can do something for sure. And in a good democracy, you should agree on fundamental facts, and you should disagree on the consequences or the policies that evolve out of it. And therefore, we rely on good journalism. We also have our own awareness from the government side, what's happening, for instance, in social media and how disinformation is spread. But you can't do it as a government alone. You need journalists who check facts, who discuss things, who debunk the ways how disinformation works, how it is spread. And what you can do from the government side is, for instance, also assist in, and we have several also bilateral projects going on, assist in training, for instance, young students, how they can, by their own, detect what's reliable news and what's disinformation. So you also need to train societies in this new world where you do not only rely on written newspapers, but also on social networks.
Okay, so let's turn to, we've talked about one form of kind of commercial digital intervention, the Outbrain and Tabulas of this world. Can we talk about more broadly digital platforms? And they've come up several times already in the conversation. And this is a complicated story because anyone in journalism knows that Google and Meta in particular and other platforms have actually themselves spent quite a lot of money in different parts of the world trying to promote good journalism. My question though is, how should we think about, in a sense, what if we were talking, and there'll be people from the big platforms here in this audience or listening, what we should tell them about how they could help, and what, by the way, what role, if any, does regulation and compulsion have? And maybe perhaps if I can start with you, Minister.
Well, I think one of the first things we should lay down for the platform developers is the need for them to participate in country when it comes to legislation to tackle the excesses that are created by their platforms. If they continue to sit outside and complain when countries make legitimate efforts to contain the excesses, we're always going to have a clash of cultures and interests that will not help resolve the problem. And if they rely on what they call their moderation policies and programs, many of which are not culturally sensitive to dog whistles and local language, etc., it will still...
So it simply may miss the real meaning of the...
They will miss the real meaning of the challenges. So what I think needs to happen is that these technology platform developers must make the investment to come in country and work with local authorities to fashion legislation and interventions that tackle it in a balanced way. But I think one of the most useful tools in tackling misinformation actually is the community of journalists themselves. It doesn't really bode well when you have authorities or third parties coming in to call out misinformation. One of the most effective tools is when credible, respected journalists in country call out what is misinformation and disinformation and don't pretend they haven't seen it or haven't heard about it, so that the public that trusts them can extend that same trust to understand that this is false, this is a false narrative, this is misinformation. If they don't and they just keep quiet and move on and keep in their own pigeonhole, trying to deal with what they call are the facts, and leave the algorithms to keep spreading the misinformation and disinformation the broader public believes it. So I think we need to call on mainstream media practitioners to be at the forefront of the battle. We need to call on the technology companies to come in country and participate in the resolution of the challenges.
And I'll come to you in a second, Paolo, if I may. But just, Minister Lindner, what's your view, and what's the German government's view, if you can say that, about what's the best role that the major digital platforms could play, and what combination of, as it were, free cooperation and regulation and requirements, further requirements on them, when you think about this picture?
You know, inside the European Union, we have this Digital Services Act, and I think that's the right approach. I think it's the same in the digital world as in the real sphere. If you have a business, if you offer a platform, you have some kind of responsibility. And the responsibility when it comes to social media platforms is, first of all, you need to act according to law which applies in the country. Meaning that if in a printed newspaper there is something which is totally wrong about me and a legal court says this is wrong, you have to erase it and you have to offer a counter statement. So why shouldn't this be applied to social media platforms? Second, you need to do it immediately. So you referred to elections, and I think that's a large challenge when it comes to election campaign. First of all, to have direct communication channels to the tech companies who offer these platforms, so that you really can call them, send them an email, and that disinformation can be erased or at least flagged really immediately. Second, I believe we also have to train somehow the public. Also, that's why I mentioned our bilateral project, so that people really do question what are the sources, what I see here. That they are able to do fact checks, for instance. And my last point would be, especially when it comes to advertisement on social media platforms, in election campaigns, it's good that there is some regulation, for instance, when it's funded from a foreign country or from outside, which is usually not allowed in most of the countries.
Yeah. But is there an opposite danger? I mean, you've described a regime which some people would say Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping already have approaches which are surprisingly like that. And is there a risk that no doubt with very good intentions, we put, in the end, government-mandated and government-controlled controls in place, which could themselves be abused to reduce the public's right to hear stuff?
Absolutely. So, to clarify that, this can't be done by the government alone. First of all, I would say that's about the Digital Services Act. There is a responsibility if an individual person says, this is disinformation about myself, or this is harming me, or something, or this is violent speech, hate speech. There is a responsibility of these companies. Yeah. Second, the problem is if people do question the legitimacy of governments or of government institutions, it can't be the role of governments alone to fight disinformation. Therefore, we need free media. Because if you would only do it by governments, it could be viewed as government propaganda. And my last point is, you also need to tell the good narratives, the good stories. If your communication is only about this is disinformation and don't believe him, don't believe her, you will not win this fight.
Very well. Now, Paula, I want to you're living this on the ground, and you've just been through a big election where disinformation played a very big part. What's your answer to the same question, really, which is, what's the way of moving to a healthy and sustainable, in the broader sense, partnership with the big digital players? I mean, maybe you can give us some examples, but just a sense about how you see it now.
Well, if you look into the expenditure of the presidential candidates on digital platforms, you will totally agree with me that platforms need to be regulated. This is my first point. We need regulation of big tech platforms. And we need to be discussing this with a wider civil society representation that brings together media organizations, academia, and civil society organizations that are involved with the topic. The solution won't come from one player itself, and it should involve the platforms as well, because they are an interest party. We need to see the platforms as part of the media ecosystem. Distribution today, our biggest source of traffic is search. This is not going to change, at least not going to change sooner. So Google needs to be involved in the discussion. We cannot make the discussion despite Google. We need to involve the platforms. This is one point. The other point I want to make is platforms are not all the same. This is a bad way. Like, platforms are different, they behave different, they have a different relationship towards journalism. And you can see by the journalist programs that they have within their business. I think also that what we've seen in Brazil now, and I don't know if you're following what's going on with Twitter, we need to reclaim the idea of free speech, because this whole discussion around misinformation and platform is distorting the idea of free speech. So to regulate platforms sometimes emerges as a way of trying to make censorship towards media organizations, which is not true. So we need to reclaim this discussion about freedom of speech. And my last point is that we cannot leave to platforms to define what is professional and truthful journalism. It's up to us to make that point. We cannot allow them. It's not their role to do that.
And Paula, can I ask you one other final question? You're not a journalist, you're a founder. When you think about the future of Nexo, do you see that future requiring funding from institutions like IFPIM forever? Or do you think it's possible to imagine in Brazil a relatively small new media startup ever being a commercially sustainable, even commercially profitable concern?
I don't want to be dependent on grants forever. I don't think it's essential that we're competitive. Since the beginning, I refuse the label alternative media. I think it does us not good. I mean, we're aiming for the mainstream. We were in an incredible growth path. We were hit by the pandemic, so it's good that we can access grants. But there's one thing. There's a huge technology is something that is extremely expensive, and it makes a huge difference on how you're going to enter this game if you have access to great technology. So for us to be part of the game, even be able to be competitive, we need to spend a lot of money on technology nowadays. So it's good that we can rely on partners to make us, that will support us in making this jump and support, for instance, our technology efforts, so we can be truly competitive. But I don't believe that if we're gonna have a strong, plural, diverse media ecosystem, that we can be dependent on grants forever. We need to have a sustainable media ecosystem, because for me, sustainability equals independence. We won't have an independent media ecosystem if it's not sustainable.
So that's an incredibly important point, that in the end, a successful business model is one of the strongest bulwarks for journalistic independence. Now, you alert members of the audience will have noticed there's a fifth empty chair, and in just a moment, I'm going to have the great pleasure and honor of welcoming on stage Madame Catherine Colonna, who's the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, who's going to join us to make some closing remarks. Just before I do that, I also want to make an announcement about IFPIM. I told you that a year ago, we were lucky enough to have the great platform of the Paris Peace Forum to announce the idea of the International Fund for Public Interest Media. I'm very pleased to announce today that we're going to establish the headquarters of the fund also here in Paris. Paris is a very natural choice for IFPIM to have as a home. France, in a troubled world, France has shown consistent leadership in promoting multilateralism and has been a staunch defender of press and media freedom, not just at home, but globally. Recent efforts and interesting new legislation make Paris a particularly attractive place for an international organization and a multilateral partnership like IFPIM. And we also have many close partners here in Paris. It's the headquarters of UNESCO, Reporters Without Borders, the Forum and the Partnership on Information and Democracy, which commissioned the report A New Deal for Journalism, which in turn recommended the creation of a new international fund, and the OECD, and I could mention others. So Madam Minister, if I can, I firstly thank you for coming and also for your support and the support of the French government and France for this effort. Bonjour.
Merci beaucoup.
And there's a...
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir. Bonsoir.
Thank you very much.
Marc.
Good afternoon, dear Mark. I think it is about time that you hear some French. I hope you can hear it fine because there's a lot of noise around here, which is great, but that means that it's difficult to hear one another.
Monsieur le Président
Ministers,
du Fonds international pour les médias,
dear Chair of the IFPIM,
Madame la Présidente de Nexo Journal, Mesdames et Messieurs,
dear Mrs. Maraglia, dear Ministers, I'm very happy to be able to offer some concluding remarks to explain to you how important free journalism is important to us in France, and how it is important to create a trusting relationship between journalists and the people reading medias. I think it is a very crucial issue to tackle because we know how medias are transforming our world in every possible aspect. So I want to thank you for taking part in this discussion on truth and trust in medias, because truth, what is truth? You're looking for it, we're looking for it. Truth and trust are two crucial elements guiding us to defend and promote free, open and quality information. In order to meet that ambition, that common ambition, we have the actual will to gather and to support independent media. The reason we're all here is because we share that conviction that information is a common good. It is a key good to democracy. And democracy is a key to progress and stability around the globe. We need to support and promote access, a large access to good information. All of us here honestly have great opportunities. This is a complex world and there are issues everywhere, but the world that we live in, us together here, is a good one because we are free to criticize what we don't agree with. We have the freedom to criticize journalists or to praise them, and not everyone in the world has that freedom. So we need to defend that right and make sure that progress is being made so that we can all have access to free and quality information. Digitalization brings out new challenges. Times are changing, and I just want to mention three of the main transformations that we are experiencing at the moment. First, the information space is globalized. It might have been a little bit the case since printing was invented, but not on the same scale. And space and time are contracting, and information can be spread almost instantly. Information and disinformation, because they travel at the same speed.
une composante fondamentale
Information is a key component of our lives,
de la vie de nos États.
for our states particularly, and that is why we can see how it can be used for maneuvers, manipulations, hostile manipulations. This is rather strong words, but I mean it. Information that aims at destabilizing our societies, not just our governments, because governments are not the only targets. Our societies as a whole are being threatened, and we can see that from non-state actors, but also state actors who are carrying out this information fight. It's asymmetric, and we don't have the same means or the same methods than these particular actors, and we should not use the same methods. You probably understand that I am talking about the propaganda that we are faced with in France and elsewhere. The information fight in Ukraine is also at the heart of these questions. Both sides are obviously trying to fight through that. We talk about a global war, a total war, and that is because it's also being done through information and disinformation. And that is the first time that it is as big in the modern world. The second thing is that this information space is being threatened by fragmentation, separation, and it is being segmented into several pieces where everyone is looking for their own truth.
So those two bubbles, if you want, are watertight, one versus the other, and we should be able to act in a network, but this is the opposite we are watching right now. Everybody is in his own world or her own world. Everybody has his or her own truth, and that's very dangerous because it is a limitation to our democracies. And so we need to have a reasoned debate with exchanges of views in order to result in a compromise, if not to a truth. Let's be very watchful about that. We should not be closed in our own truth, because that's very dangerous. I would like to mention a third danger. We have new players coming in the information sphere, particularly the digital platforms, and those digital platforms are more and more powerful from an economic and political and strategic point of view. They have a significant power now, and it's quite formidable, and we should be afraid about that. I think that apart from the old generations, and I'm part of those old generations, young people find everything they want online. I don't want to go further in my thoughts, but I would like to mention the Twitter takeover. 40 years ago, when the web sphere started to exist, we were all very optimistic or even naive. We thought that internet would be a tool in order to defend freedom, to extend freedom or liberties, or whatever the term you want to use, and that would facilitate access to information for the largest number of people possible. And at present, we are wondering whether we are going to be able to survive to Twitter. But I could mention other platforms than Twitter. But let's take the example of Twitter, which is very illustrative and even a caricature of those platforms, a caricature of this new world They are non-stake players, not players who are not responsible to the people, were not elected by the people, and they have a great deal of influence in the life of governments. So it's unprecedented. We've never seen that in the past. So I believe that there is a need for regulation, and you're not going to be surprised when I say that. We are all in danger if we do not have a stringent regulation of this new information space. In order to take up those challenges and in order to achieve a more reliable information, France has announced in 2019 with Reporters Without Borders, the Partnership for Democracy. We were in New York a few weeks ago outside of the United States General Assembly, and I have been able to chair the second summit from New York with Reporters Without Borders. I think it was the 21st or 22nd of September. Several countries decided to join the partnership. I'm thinking about Niger, Albania, and they have decided to join us during this fifth Forum for Peace in Paris. So we have 50 countries that are members of this partnership. It's a good result, very good result. So I would like to welcome this progress, and also I would like to welcome that the inaugural meeting of the Observatory for Observation and Democracy be held here in Paris. You know that it's talked about like an IPCC of information, because there's a need for knowledge and for warning signals concerning all those issues that I've mentioned. We need to help or to support people who make decisions in the media, in civil society, but of course in the governments as well. We have to work on all that. There are many issues at stake. I have only mentioned a few of them. For instance, the power of algorithms, the emergence of a new potential totalitarianism, but more insidious, more efficient, smarter than the armed totalitarianisms. So we need to make the right decision, and we need to be supported by the right expertise from that Observatory for Democracy. I think that you have initiated a year ago a recommendation for partnership in order to set up a new deal for journalism based on a principle of economic sustainability of independent media, transparency of media ownership, and a new value for the trusted media. Of course, we support wholeheartedly this action. It's a fundamental challenge in order to fight for a free and independent press, media. I talked about economic sustainability because without economic sustainability, there won't be any independent media. In order to achieve that, we need to support you, to help you on a short-term basis, very rapidly, strengthening economic resilience. And this is one of the priorities of our French diplomacy in the whole world, or in the countries where we are established. And we need to supply a reliable democratic information in many languages. Let's not forget that, many languages. You know that the languages can help train and educate people, and I don't think that English should be the only language used in the whole world. So I would like to welcome the UNESCO work on this topic, particularly the certification standard, which is called Initiative for the Conference in Journalism. JTI, the French acronym, and 11 states of this partnership support it. The point is to promote media which comply with specific ethical and independent regulations. Let me conclude. The President of the Republic, which has initiated this Paris Forum for Peace, has committed committed France to support your initiative. But I would like to be even more specific today and give you the good news that you have given us, Mark. I do hope it's good news. France is very happy to be able to support this fund up to 15 million euros over a period of 3 years. So we will contribute 15 million euros for 3 years. Thank you for your applause.
Et bien sûr, nous vous aiderons, comme nous l'avons
And of course, we are going to continue to help you by supporting your search for other donors. Maybe they could be even more generous than we are. That would be good, not to be the first donor. And of course, I would like to welcome and thank you for this decision to set up in Paris the initiative that you represent. It's a sign of recognition and gratitude for our commitment, and it's going to go on, of course. We have the right tools, Canal France International. Now, a few figures. Now, we, at Canal France International, it's 15.5 million euros in 21, 35 projects for professionals, media professionals in more than 20 countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, in Middle East, in Maghreb, etc. And we also have implemented a certain number of training programs for journalists, and we have given various assistance programs. We set up various assistance programs. We have also renovated the legal framework for those programs, and we will use the IPCC in order to make progress. I'm going to stop here, and I would like to guarantee that what you are doing beyond the organization that you represent, what you are doing is extremely important for us and for our democracies. France would really like to help independent media, is fully aware of the new challenges that we have to take up. Not only you benefit from our support, but also we would like to help you to grow, to thrive, and to disseminate this high-quality information throughout the world. There are many challenges that we have to take up. It's a long-term fight. Thank you very much, and you will have our support in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister Collenard. And if I can just say, I'm very glad you raised the question of language. If IFPIM is meant to be a fund in the end to make sure that people everywhere around the world get trustworthy news, and they will believe that news if it's made by people of their own culture in their own part of the world, using the language they use in their everyday life. So not mainly English, actually, to be honest, not even sort of particularly English. This, I believe, is going to support journalism in French, in Portuguese, here's one of our first, and in all of the other, whether large scale or small scale, all of the great languages of the world. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Minister, for coming and making your announcement. And I'd also like to thank our other ministers, Minister Nkrumah, Minister Lindner, and our media founder, and someone who's actually fighting this fight on the ground day in, day out, to Paola Miraglia. Thank you very much for all coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you all very much.